Good morning, everyone. Another cool day in Virginia. Today's my honor to introduce today's speaker, Keith Worrell, a good friend of mine. Last week I did a talk about the Codswolds. Well, he was my partner in crime over there for a week, and we had a wonderful time, as we know. He continued his journey through Europe, spending some extra time in London and Paris and over to Venice, so I know he enjoyed himself. But he's back and getting settled in. Keith is in our seminary program right now. I'm very pleased to have him there, and I'm acting as his mentor. Keith has a very interesting job. I met him through Altmeyer Funeral Home, where I've worked for many, many years. And Keith is a life celebrant there, which means what Keith does is he meets with families, and when someone passes on, he tells that person's story and brings it to life. What really makes me feel close to Keith, you've heard me often talk about that energy that we have around us, and sometimes I get to see that. Keith has a beautiful energy about him. What makes him an excellent life celebrant, which I think will make him an excellent minister also, is that he has that energy of love and caring and giving, which I think is so important. So let's give Keith a big round of applause. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today. So, are we living? Life is defined as being alive, the opposite of being dead. But what is living? There are many definitions depending on who you ask. I learned as my parents were declining, dying in and out of the hospital, that many in the medical community define living as being alive or still breathing. As long as they can keep you breathing, then you are, by their definition, living. We look at many religions where living is defined as adhering to their particular doctrine. If you live the way that they guide or teach, then you are living. Some people base or define living as a goal or a lifestyle, a financial or materialistic level of success. The list goes on and is as an individual decision for each and every one of us. I'm going to talk about me today and how I, in my 50s and with a good amount of gray hair, finally started living. Why am I doing this today, sharing rather than teaching? There are a couple of reasons. I'm currently in the ordination program here at the fellowship, and I could not attend the weekend of personal sharing. So I'm taking this opportunity to share a bit of my life and to hopefully allow each of you to get to know me a little better. My likes, my passions, my reasons. It is said that with age comes wisdom. Well, I'm not too sure about that, as I've never considered myself what I would describe as wise. I'd say I'm more a product of my environment, a combination of evolution and some good teaching, mentorship, lots of self-study, realization and acceptance, eventually self-love, which you must have to really live. You must love yourself and you must love life if you are to really live. For me, it was a process, a very long and sometimes hard process, with more back steps than I could ever begin to remember. I will share with you some of the bigger ones. As a child, my life was not always a happy one. I was not abused or uncared for or harmed in any way. The issue was emotional, mental, personal. My father, when I was about 8 years old or so, developed a drinking problem. He became a very bad alcoholic, which led to uncomfortable, embarrassing situations. I couldn't have friends over, never knowing what state we may find him in. Of course, I worried a lot. When would the next shoe drop? What would he do that would bring down the house or bring down the family? I worried constantly about my mother. I would beg her to leave him. She never did, and his alcoholism lasted through my mid-20s. Eventually, they had a good life together, and he and I became as close as we could be. But the point is, it was part of my evolution. It was part of my process. I did learn to appreciate the things that I did learn from him. Some good, some was learning what not to do or how not to behave. Two things that I do credit my father with. One, my love of Christmas. I've always loved the idea of Christmas, but growing up, as you can imagine, we could never really do Christmas. Having people over, the perfectly decorated house, the dinners, the parties. That is why partly I am such a Christmas fanatic now. It has to be perfect. It has to be the Norman Rockwell Christmas with family and friends, good tidings, joy, fun, in an environment that is safe, with no worries of embarrassment, at least not from me. The second accomplishment that I will credit my father with is my role as a father myself, or how I have fulfilled that role. It's fair to say that he taught me how not to be a father. That sounds like I'm angry. I'm not. Any anger, animosity, hurt was let go of years ago. At this point, it is just a reality, a stepping stone that became part of who I am today. But back to the father role, meaning my role as a father. I always did, and I still do, tell my daughter I love her every time we talk, which is just about every day, if not multiple times a day. She never doubted or even had to wonder if she was loved. I'll wrap up my father's story with something that I found quite funny years after the fact, proving once again that life does go on and things do come full circle. When my mother died 4 years ago, she outlived my father by 10 years. As I was planning her funeral, I called her pastor, David Dillon, with the Rock Church in Franklin, Virginia, which is where I'm from. I wanted to have her service at her church, and I wanted David, who for decades has been a close family friend to all of us, including to my father after his alcoholism, to officiate the service. Anyway, I went to the church and met with David to plan Mom's funeral service. And sitting in his office, I said to him, David, do you remember the first time that you and I ever spoke? He said no, so I refreshed his memory. Dad was at the height of his alcoholism. I was in my early 20s. I had moved out and had my own apartment. I was begging my mother to come and live with me. She wouldn't. She said, David told me I cannot leave him. Now, believe it or not, I used to be somewhat outspoken, not to mention demanding and forceful. I called the church, got David on the phone, who I had never met, and told him in no uncertain terms, I think I was more yelling, that he needed to call my mother and tell her that she could leave him. Of course, David explained why he could not do that. And just before I hung up on him, I shouted at him, you go live with that man, I didn't say man, for a few days and then tell her she can't leave. David and I shared a good laugh together 30 years after the fact. Now, my childhood was not all bad. Mostly it wasn't bad at all. I have some very good memories. Specifically, more often I think of being on my grandparents' front porch, sitting in the porch swing in the country at their house. They had a garden. We would pick stuff out of the garden, sit on the front porch. We would, snap the snap beans, shuck the corn. Neighbors would stop by. People would ride by, blow the horn, you'd wave. That is some of my good childhood memories, combined with what is still my most favorite smell, fresh cut grass that was always prevalent on their porch. As I became an adult and started my own life on my own terms, looking for my own way, trying to find my own happiness, like most, I went through the materialistic phase, wanting more, believing that more is better. More is where you find happiness. More is where you start really living. I think most of us have been there and have found that there is no truer saying than the words, "You cannot buy happiness." So for me, if happiness could not be found in possessions, it must be found in relationships. With much self-reflection, acceptance, and sometimes disappointment, I can assure you, I am probably the world's worst person to be with in a relationship. We'll just leave that there, but trust me. So if materialism doesn't work for me, and relationships, romantic relationships, don't work for me long term, what does? What makes me happy, content, peaceful? The reality is, it is the simplest of things. I have started enjoying the journey more so than the destination. For the journey is where true living is found. Once you reach the destination, you're done. It's the journey, the adventure, that the memories are made. That's where the living really happens. And it makes sense. Think about it. If we really break it down to the least common denominator here on earth, the ultimate destination for all of us is death. And who's in a hurry to get there? Not me. The journey is where it is. That is where life happens. As many of you know, Pastor Jennings and I recently took a trip to Europe. That journey was amazing. And I will say the destination was beyond belief. But looking back at the memories, it was the journey that sticks out most, more so than the destination. The castles, the gardens, the dinners, the wine, all absolutely perfect. Beginning with our plane ride from New York to London, we upgraded our tickets, and let me tell you, we were like two kids that had never been anywhere. To the point that the lady sitting behind us told us to settle down. Of course, we did not. We ordered more champagne. From the moment that we arrived at our first village in the Cotswolds, we were in love with the experience. We ate and drank at pubs that had been in business since the 1600s. We saw beautiful old churches and cemeteries. We went inside castles that families still live in today, whose families have lived there for countless hundreds of years. We climbed staircases that kings and queens have climbed. We walked fields that have seen everything from wars to new crops each year, deaths and rebirths, endings and new beginnings on so many levels. Even our own trip evolved. As our week came to a close, Larry headed back to the U.S. Sharon would only allow him 1 week abroad with me. I went on to London, Paris, and Venice, a change of venue, from castles and the rolling fields of rural England to street cafes and the sights of 3 remarkable cities, unlike anything I have ever experienced. I will share a couple of stories that stand out to me, not because they hold any significant relevance, I just found them memorable or amusing. A story of a small world. Larry and I met 10 other people in the Cotswolds that were part of our walking tour through the fields and the sights. Believe it or not, two of the ladies from the Cotswolds that we met, I ran into in London the week afterwards. I was going to see Phantom of the Opera in London, and they were going to see Hamilton the same night that I ran into them. We decided to get together for a drink in a pub afterwards. My show ended a little before theirs. I walked down to where they were. They had already gotten into a pub and found a little spot in a corner. I sat with the two ladies, we ordered a drink, and there were three young men sitting not far from us at a table of their own. And one of the ladies said, I think they might be involved with the Hamilton production. They look a little familiar, and I think I heard them mention it. So we had a few more drinks, and I said to one of the gentlemen, would you do two things for us? One, would you take a picture of these ladies and myself with my phone? Of course, he said yes. He took the picture. I said, the other thing is a question. Are you guys all involved or at all involved with the Hamilton production? And the guy smiled and said, he is Hamilton. So we ended up having a drink with Hamilton while we were there. Small world. The second story is a story of myself and maybe a little stupidity mixed in. I don't know if anybody's ever been to London, and if you have you been to Harrods, which is a really nice, over-the-top department store. Crazy stuff nobody can afford, at least in my realm. I was walking through Harrods, and I was walking through the Louis Vuitton section, and they had two scarves that were framed and hanging as you walk into the Louis Vuitton section. I glanced at them and thought they were pretty enough that I snapped a picture of them. And then I finished my few days in London and headed to Paris, where I went into the Louis Vuitton store, which again is way above my normal place I'd go into. There are security guards to get in, and as I walked in, this gentleman came up impeccably dressed and asked if he could help me with anything, and I said, no, I'm just looking around. But as I was standing behind him, they also had that same scarf framed and hanging, and I thought, it must be a sign. I should get that for my daughter. And as a matter of fact, you can. I think I'll get that scarf, or one just like it, for my daughter. And of course, he said, excellent taste, sir. That's wonderful. May I have your passport? So I give him my passport, and he said, we'll get it gift wrapped for her. This will take about 10 minutes for the process. Can I get you a water or a cappuccino while you wait? I said, oh, no, it's fine. And then I thought, and I said, how much is that scarf? And he told me. And I said, why don't you bring me some champagne while you're boxing that up and keep the glass filled? And the third story was in Venice. I'd had lunch at a beautiful little Italian restaurant, and I planned to spend the rest of the day just kind of walking the streets of Venice and taking in the sights, the canals. And I hadn't gotten very far from the restaurant, and there was an outdoor cafe with a live band playing, and they were playing some just beautiful Italian music. It was a full band. And I sat down in the table, thankfully, that was open, that was closest to that band. And the waiter came over and he said, can I help you? And I said, how long are they going to be playing? And he said, for hours. And I said, well, bring me a bottle of champagne. So I decided my afternoon would be spent drinking that bottle of champagne, listening to that band. Well, this couple came up, a younger couple, probably in their mid-20s, and they sat at the table right beside me. And eventually, the gentleman got up, got on his knee, and proposed to this beautiful lady. So I motioned my waiter over and sent them a bottle of champagne, and they invited me to join them. And we had just the best conversation. They were a beautiful young couple from Morocco. And I looked at them, and you could see and you could feel the love. It would even make a marriage cynic like me believe. But I looked at them and I thought, there is hope. There is hope for a new life, a new beginning for our country, for our world. There is hope and love, and it lies within our young people with good and loving and open hearts. Looking back on the trip, what sticks out in my mind are not the destinations. It's the tiny moments that would almost seem irrelevant as they were happening. It's the conversations that Larry and I shared, the stupid, jabber-filled laughter of two grown men acting like children, the jokes, the camaraderie, the people that I met from all over the world. Our lives combined for the brief time that we shared together. Hearing their stories and sharing mine, just a snapshot of each. Walking through fields beside somebody you have never known that you will never see again, and enjoying the beauty that you are experiencing together. Living life in the moment. And what did we find ourselves pointing out? Not the big stuff for the most part, not the vastness. It was, oh, look at that flower. Look at that little lamb. Smell that sticky toffee pudding. Savor this pistachio gelato. The excitement was always, is always the anticipation of what is to come. Living, I have come to realize for me, is found in the journey, the anticipation of what lies ahead, combined with the knowledge, the lessons of the past. Any deviation in that past, and I would not be who or where I am today. I would not be a father to my, who I like to describe as perfect daughter. I wouldn't have true, deep friendships with people like Larry Jennings, who I treasure and adore. I wouldn't have my circle that lifts and supports me. I would not have met you and become part of this fellowship organization that I find filled with peace and with love, two of the most prized possessions that I try to live daily. I cannot pinpoint the moment that it happened, but I can tell you that I began really living when I began living a life of peace and of love. That's when it really started. Looking back, I would not change one single thing, for each step molded me, made me, and at the age of 58, with gray hair and maybe a tad bit of wisdom, I can say that I love the journey, I love life, I love you all, and I love me. Thank you.